Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Invin. Today I wanted to bring you guys a guide on how progression works in New World, how you can progress your character, and what you'll need to be doing in order to get your progression to actually go up in New World. The main focus of this video is going to be on the basics of progression and the three types of progression, which are going to be player levels and XP, weapon levels and their XP, and finally life skills or trade skills, whatever you want to call them, so your crafting, refining, and gathering skills as well. And I'm going to cover all of the basics of these skills, as well as give some tips along the way for the mid to late game relating to each of these progression points, which hopefully a lot of you guys will find useful. Now, if any of you guys have got a few hundred hours like me in the game by now, probably most of this information you will know, but if you want to watch the video through, I'd much appreciate that. And if you want to leave any comments, little tips of how you can level up quicker, how you can level up weapons quicker, anything like that, or any crafting and gathering tips and things like that as well in the comments, that would be much appreciated. Help everybody else out that maybe is a little bit newer to the game. That'd be really cool. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it here. And like I said there are the three main areas of progression. So you've got your overall player level, this is your XP, and this gives you access to attribute points when you level up. You've then got your weapon XP and levels, and when a weapon is leveled up, you get access to a point there, which then gives you access to a passive or active skill relating to that weapon. And you are limited to 3 active skills per weapon, so I'm going to go over how to choose those and which ones are good. And then also we've got trade skills, which are broken down into basically 3 broad categories, which is going to be your gathering, your refining, and your crafting there. So getting on to attribute points, which is going to be like the first thing that you get when you level up your character, you get given an attribute point, and in total these core attribute points by the time you get to level 60 will amount to 190 points when you are at that max level 60. Each attribute starts with a base number of 5 points into it, and you cannot go below this. This is the minimum number you can have. You can obviously increase all of these, but you can't take any points off, so each stat will have at least 5 points into it. Now, you can also gain points and attribute points from in-game gear, so what weapons and which armor you equip does affect your attribute point distribution, and again, this can tip you into the next threshold, which we'll move on to in a second, and can increase your overall weapon damage if they scale off the specific attribute that the armor or the weapon has. Then that's really helpful, as it can scale your weapon damage up as well, which is really the aim of your attribute points there. Higher tier equipment and gear in games obviously gives you access to more attribute points, so when you get to that mid to late game, you're going to be seeing those tier 4 and 5 drops. They're going to give you a lot more attribute points per item than the lower tier ones, so as you go through the game as well, that is going to be one of your main points of progression, is getting that end game gear that really suits the style of play that you are going for. Now, gear can also give you perks and gem slots available, which can do different things for you throughout the game, such as tools can have gathering speed increases, weapons can have certain things such as a refresh on your abilities, and then gem slots are available where you can put a variety of different gems in, which will give you a certain set bonus in the game, whether it's damage reduction of some form on the armor gems, or indeed damage increase or conversion on the weapons there. New World, obviously, any of you that have played it or read up about it, you know that this game is completely classless, which means essentially your attribute points are what determines the role or the class type that you will play. And for any of you that are kind of unfamiliar with this, there is 3 main types, which is your DPS, your damage dealers, your tank, which is going to be the person who engages the mobs first and gains what you call aggro, where the mobs will attack them, and finally your healer, who obviously keeps everybody alive as well as themselves and tries to not gain too much aggro in this game, which can be particularly hard. Now, these attribute points are going to be fed into certain attributes. There's 5 different ones in the game, which are strength, constitution, intelligence, focus, and dexterity, and each of those leads to a particular role or weapon type, which scales off of these attributes, and that can indeed then lead to your role and type of play in the game. And obviously there is some hybrid classes, like some of you may have seen the paladin, which is kind of a cross between a tank and a healer, and maybe some of these more bruiser, as you would call, classes, which is kind of a hybrid DPS tank. So there is other options as well, but those are kind of like your main core ones, which I'm going to go over today. And obviously you can dive into builds and stuff in other videos that I've made, or on some of these websites, which I'll give you links to in the description down below, such as WorldForge, which I'm using here to show you guys some of the attributes. Now, jumping a little bit more in depth into the individual attributes themselves. So strength increases the amount of damage with melee weapons, and some melee weapons scale solely from your strength attribute, while others will scale off things like dexterity as well. Now, if it scales off one attribute solely, then it's a 1-for-1 point system. Every point is worth 1 scaling point into attributes, whereas if it's 2, it's 0.9 for the main stat and 0.65 for the secondary stat. And this will tell you on the weapon, if you hover over the orange question mark at the end of the attribute, it will tell you which weapons scale from it and whether it's the main or secondary stat. stat as well, judging by which one comes first and second. That can help you in terms of which attribute you should be prioritizing in game in order to increase your overall damage. Dexterity scales your damage with ranged weapons such as the bow and the musket. Intelligence is for your magical attacks, so your ice gauntlet and your fire staff. Focus is going to be for your healers, and this is due to the scaling from the life staff weapon and also the attribute threshold perks, which we'll get onto in just a moment. And finally, constitution is going to increase your health, so it's going to be your main stat for any of those tank players out there. So like I mentioned there, each attribute also has a threshold bonus, and every 50 points that are allocated into this, either by raw points added in when you level up or by your gear, this will unlock a certain threshold perk basically, which will give you a 1 combat and 1 non-combat bonus or attribute. And these are really helpful because they can be things like increased critical damage, increased damage with melee light attacks, increased mana pools, increased healing capacity, all of these different things which are really useful in the game. And as well as this, they do give you a non-combat one, so it can be 10% faster mining, 10% faster gathering, all that sort of good stuff. And again, I'll leave a link to Worldforge, which I'm not affiliated with, but it's a great website, in the description down below, so you guys can go ahead and look through all of these yourselves as well, as it's really useful to find out which one's linked to which skill. If you do drop below 50 points when you're switching out gear, or the nearest 50 point threshold when you're switching out gear, because some of it boosts certain stats, then you will lose access to these perks, so bear that in mind when you are swapping out for gear as well. And obviously then finally you can respec your attribute points later into the game or earlier in the game, depending on what you want to run. If you want to switch out weapons, this is a really good idea. First 20 levels is free to respec, and after that it does cost a certain amount of gold depending which level you are, but this can be done at any point throughout the game, so you are never locked into one particular set of attributes, which is really nice. We're then moving on to weapon masteries and the weapon levels themselves. So you can use any weapon at all at any point in New World, and you are never locked into specific roles such as only melee or only ranged, but the damage on these weapons do scale from certain attributes. So if you want a weapon to be actually good and you want to try something new, then make sure you do look at which attribute the weapon damage scales from, and make sure to change it. Do not leave your points the same if the weapon does not scale off the same points as the previous one you are using, as you will miss out on a ton of damage and effectiveness from that weapon. Now, these weapons each have their own levels, so each time you use a weapon you gain XP for it when you kill a mob, and this will level the weapon up. And each time you get a weapon level up, you get access to a point which you can then put into a skill tree, and each weapon has 2 skill trees. So for example, a hatchet has a berserker and an axe thrower skill tree, and you can put points into both of these. In total you get 20 weapon levels, which means you get 20 points, and each tree has 19 available abilities in it, in a combination of passives and actives. So between the two, that is 38, which means you could fully max out one tree if you wanted to, or you could split points into both, which is usually the way that people go with this. They take some passives and actives off one and some off the other, and mix and match the best of the both trees. My favorite method to level up weapons quickly, particularly when you're a higher player level and you're just starting off with a new weapon, is actually to use the in-game elite open world dungeon type zones, which are the elite expedition zones. You do this with a group, you can level up a weapon from 1 to 20 in just a mere few hours if you've got a very good group with you, which is really nice, and it can get those weapon levels done very fast, meaning you can get a lot of those skills, and it's particularly useful if you are preparing for a war, particularly early game, so bear that in mind for when launch comes around. In total, you can equip 2 weapons in New World, and each of these can have 3 active skills at one time, and that's between the 2 trees. So you can have maybe a life staff with 3 active skills, and maybe a fire staff with 3 active skills, which means in total you'll have 6 active skills, and this can be between any 2 weapons, and the cooldowns will continue on these even when you switch out weapons. So learning the rotation of your weapons that you've got with you, how the cooldowns work, and how you should rotate these out is going to be a very valuable skill, and means that you've actually got access to 6 abilities on constant cooldowns, which is really good, and will give you a big advantage when you learn how to use these in the game. Again, with weapon attributes and specs, you can actually respec these at a later point, and it costs you nothing up until level 20, and then level 20 onwards it increases in Azoth per level. And again, it does cost to do this, but you can do it at any point providing you have the right amount, so you're never locked in with a specific weapon choice, so you can change up the skills if you're doing PvE or PvP or whatever you want to do. And on screen right now you will see which weapons scale off which attributes, so that you can get a bit of a combination between the first attribute points that are covered here and the weapon points, and see which sort of build you would like to go for with each of these, and which build you might be leaning towards. And again, like I said at the beginning part there, I will leave the Worldforge link in the description below, so you guys can go on there, mess around with a build and see which build you might like to go for the open beta, and indeed when the launch comes around in September 28th. So finally here we're going to look at trade or life skills, and these are in 3 different categories, which are going to be your gathering, your refining, and your crafting. Now firstly, starting off with gathering here, there are 5 different types of gathering skills, which are fishing, skinning, mining, logging, and harvesting. Each of these has an independent level which you gain XP for by using that skill, so mining a rock, chopping down a tree, etc. will get you levels in the relevant skill. When you level up that skill, you'll be able to collect better and higher tier resources, and these can be used to refine, craft, or indeed sell for a nice profit on the market if that's what you're trying to do as well. At certain milestones, resources become tracked on your in-game HUD or heads-up display, so on the compass at the top of your screen. When you get to a certain level, so for example 50 in skinning, it will then track turkeys and rabbits for you, and this is the same for each skill. You get certain resources tracked at each level threshold, which is really helpful. Can help you to find a lot more resources on the map, and equally when you level up these skills, you are going to be then getting access to mine those higher tier resources when you do level up. So for example, when you get to level 50, you get access to gold in the mining category. When you get to level 100 mining, you get star metal, and so on, and these increase as you go up obviously, and the speed increases the further up in the levels you get as well. Now all of these different thresholds for tracking and for requirements in terms of when you can harvest them are all shown on the in-game menu, so you guys can have a look through these yourselves and find out which ones you can get these at. Now next we're moving on to refining, which again is 5 different skills. You've got your smelting, stone cutting, woodworking, tanning, and weaving. Smelters obviously refine ores into ingots, amongst other things. Stone cutting is used to refine stone blocks and, more importantly, gems that you can put into the sockets on your gear. And, very importantly, it is used for crafting keystones for expeditions, which for some of the late game ones can only be crafted every few hours or once per day. So you're going to want to really focus on stone cutting if you're planning to do a lot of those end game PvE expeditions, because it might be every 24 hours you can craft that key. So if you can get a few stockpiled early on, it's going to be really good, and not to mention very valuable to have people on your team that are going to be able to craft these keys so that you can do as many runs with your company or your alliance as possible. Woodworking obviously is cutting logs into lumber. Tanners refine hide into leather, and weavers into cloth that can be used for things like armor and bags. Again, really useful for crafting bags early on if you want to make a decent amount of money. Now leveling up these skills is done by refining materials at the relevant station, and when you level it up you'll get access to better and higher tier resources to be able to refine to, which is better for crafting or for a good profit on the market. And again, this will be in tandem with your resource gathering, because you'll need to gather the higher tier resources in order to refine them into higher tier ones. So it works hand in hand, and obviously these then both work with crafting. Crafting, you've got 7 crafting skills. Weaponsmithing, obviously for making weapons like swords, shields, etc. You've got armoring, which is for metal, so it's metal armors, heavy armors, that sort of thing. And also with armoring, you're going to get your medium and light armors on the armor crafting station, that sort of thing. You've got jewel crafting, which is actually making the jewelry itself out of the gems, so you can make necklaces, earrings, and rings. You've then got engineering, which is going to be for your tools. Some of the bows and muskets as well can be made through this one. Cooking, which is obviously going to be for your foods, so your regen foods and your stat boosting foods. You've got Arcana, which is going to be for potions, wisps, which go into jewel crafting at higher levels, as well as all different types of gem cutting. When you're trying to get those higher tier gems, you're going to need wisps and higher tier Arcana things there, so they work hand in hand. And finally, furnishing, which is going to be to make furniture for your home. Now, I've got a guide on most of these things on the channel, so if you do want to go ahead and get a bit more information on those, go ahead and look through my New World playlist. All of the videos there will be available for you guys to have a look at, and those videos go into depth about each of these crafting skills and how you can actually use them, what they're good for, and what you can actually get out of maxing out the levels on them. So that's really useful if you want to know that information too. Getting XP in these is much like the other two. Basically, you just craft things in the relevant category and you'll gain XP, and again you'll work out which ones are better, as each time you click on an item it tells you how much XP it's got, and essentially you want to be spam crafting the one that gives you the most XP for the lowest amount of resources, so you can level that up as fast as possible. And the town board quests are really good for the weaponsmithing and armor smithing particularly. Also the cooking ones, really good when you get the XP from the town board quest, because not only do you get a lot of player XP for completing them, even with the nerfs, but you also then get a lot of relevant crafting XP for the crafting skill that it asks you to use in order to make that. So the set of iron ornaments or whatever, it gives you a decent amount of weaponsmithing or armor smithing or whatever crafting XP, which is really nice too. The higher level you get this to, obviously you unlock new recipes to be able to craft better items and higher tier items of better quality. So in the end game, you're going to be able to craft some of the best things in the game, so you're really going to want to level these ones up. Some higher tier items in both the refining and crafting sections will require a higher tier workstation, so be aware that you might not be able to do these in some of that lower tier locations in whichever settlement you're in your world. It does depend, obviously, and each server will have different settlements with different higher level stations, so bear that in mind. If you can't craft there and you've got the required level and the materials, check that the station is the high enough level. If not, you might have to go somewhere else to craft or refine these items. Now, hopefully you guys have found this basic guide helpful. I've tried to throw in a few tips for those mid to late game players, and like I said at the start, if you are one of the more experienced guys like myself, you've got a few hundred, nearing on to 1,000 hours in the game now, then please leave any comments, any tips you've got down below in the comments to help everybody else out. If you have found this video useful, please leave me a like on it, as it really does help. And if you are new to the channel, drop a subscribe. We're uploading New World content every single day, so it'd be great to have you here as part of the community. Other than that, if you are interested in joining the Discord server, we've got a full community chatting about New World over there, as well as if you want to join my New World company for beta and for release, head over there and get involved with us there. We'd love to have you. Other than that, as always, thank you very much for watching. Take care and peace.